Chapter 9. The Doll That Changed the World, Ruth Handler and the Creation of Barbie. Los Angeles, California, 1956. By Michael Tafla. Copyright 2025. Ruth Handler stood in the doorway of her daughter Barbara's bedroom, observing with quiet fascination. 10-year-old Barbara and her friends weren't playing with their baby dolls as mothers. Instead, they had cast aside the infant-shaped toys and were using paper dolls to act out scenes of adult life, imagining careers, adventures, and futures beyond motherhood. It wasn't the first time Ruth had noticed this pattern. For years, she had watched her daughter and friends play with these two-dimensional adult figures, creating elaborate scenarios where they projected themselves into grown-up roles. The observation struck Ruth as significant, particularly because the toy industry of the 1950s offered children only baby dolls or child dolls, nothing that represented adulthood or aspiration. That evening, Ruth brought up her observation to her husband Elliot as they sat in the living room of their Los Angeles home after the children had gone to bed. "I've been watching Barbara and her friends," she said. "They don't want to play mother to their dolls. They're using those paper dolls to imagine themselves as grown women, as airline stewardesses and career women and brides." Elliot nodded, only half listening as he reviewed sales figures for their company, Mattel Toys. The small manufacturer they had co-founded in 1945 had grown considerably, making them moderately successful in the competitive toy industry. Their biggest hit had been the burp gun, a toy pistol that made a ratcheting sound when fired, but they were constantly looking for new product ideas. "I think there's something there," Ruth continued, more insistent now. "What if we created a three-dimensional adult doll, a teenage fashion model that girls could use to imagine their futures?" Elliot looked up from his paperwork, skeptical. "The buyers at the toy stores all say the same thing. Mothers don't want their daughters playing with dolls that have bosoms." Ruth waved away his concern. "The buyers are wrong. They're men who don't understand how girls actually play. Barbara and her friends are telling us something important about what children really want." This conversation would become one of many, where Ruth pitched her idea for an adult-bodied doll. For 3 years, she would face resistance not just from retailers, but from the all-male design team at Mattel. Yet Ruth Handler was not a woman easily deterred. Her persistence would eventually lead to the creation of the Barbie doll, one of the most successful and controversial toys in history, and a product that would transform not only Mattel but the entire toy industry. What Ruth couldn't know that evening was that her insight about children's play would ultimately build a billion-dollar empire, or that the same entrepreneurial drive that created Barbie would also help her rise from one of the most devastating business and personal failures a person could face. Ruth Moscow was born in 1916 in Denver, Colorado, the youngest of 10 children in a Polish-Jewish immigrant family. Her parents, Jacob and Ida Moscow, had fled anti-Semitism in Poland, seeking better opportunities in America. Jacob worked as a blacksmith, later opening a small bicycle shop. Ruth's childhood was marked by hardship and responsibility. Her mother's health was poor, and as the youngest daughter, Ruth was expected to help care for her. When Ruth was just 10 years old, she began working in her father's shop, developing business skills that would serve her well later in life. "I was pricing merchandise when I was 10, Ruth later recalled. "I was a very independent little girl. I knew what I wanted, and I went after it." This independence was both a product of necessity and a sign of Ruth's natural entrepreneurial spirit. Unlike many women of her generation who were encouraged to focus on homemaking, Ruth developed ambitions beyond the domestic sphere. After graduating from high school in 1933, during the depths of the Great Depression, she moved to Denver to attend junior college, supporting herself by working as a stenographer. It was during this period that she met Elliot Handler, an art student from Chicago who was visiting his family in Denver. Despite their different backgrounds, Elliot came from a more affluent family and had artistic rather than business aspirations. They connected immediately. He was the first man who didn't think I was too aggressive, Ruth later said. Everyone else thought I was pushy. They married in 1938 and soon moved to Los Angeles, where Elliot hoped to pursue a career in industrial design. Ruth took a job as a secretary at Paramount Pictures, quickly rising to become a purchasing agent, a position rarely held by women at the time. Meanwhile, Elliot began designing and crafting decorative light fixtures and other household items made from lucite, a newly available plastic material. Ruth, recognizing the commercial potential of his creations, encouraged him to turn his hobby into a business. Elliot was the creative one, the artist, Ruth explained in later interviews. I was the one who saw how to turn his talent into a business. With Ruth's business acumen and Elliot's design skills, they founded a small company called Elliot Handler Plastics in 1939. Their partnership established a pattern that would continue throughout their careers, Elliot providing creative vision, while Ruth handled marketing, sales, and strategic planning. The business showed promise until World War II diverted plastic supplies to military use. Faced with this setback, the Handlers pivoted, partnering with another designer, Harold Matt Matson, to form a new company focused on picture frames. They named their venture Mattel, combining Matt's name with Elliot's. When the picture frames began selling well, Ruth suggested using the wood scraps to make dollhouse furniture, which turned out to be even more profitable than the frames. Matson eventually sold his share of the business due to health problems, leaving the Handlers as the sole owners of what was becoming a successful toy company. The transition from plastic housewares to toys represented the first of many pivots in Ruth Handler's career, a pattern of turning setbacks into opportunities that would define her professional life. Lucerne, Switzerland, 1956. The alpine air was crisp as Ruth Handler walked along the cobblestone streets of Lucerne with her children, Barbara and Kenneth. The family was enjoying a European vacation, a luxury afforded by Mattel's growing success. As they passed a shop window, Ruth noticed an unusual doll display. Unlike the baby dolls common in American toy stores, this was an adult figured doll with distinct breasts, a tiny waist, and long legs. She stopped abruptly, her attention captured. "What is that?" she asked, pointing to the doll. A shop attendant explained that it was Lily, a doll based on a character in a German comic strip, an attractive, independent, and sometimes cheeky working woman. Lily had originally been marketed to adults as a novelty gift, but had become popular with children who enjoyed dressing her in fashionable clothing. Ruth was immediately struck by the parallel to her observations of Barbara's play patterns. Here was physical proof that her idea for an adult-bodied doll wasn't outlandish. It already existed in Europe. She purchased 3 Lily dolls, 1 for Barbara and 2 to take back to Mattel. This chance encounter in a Swiss shop window would provide the catalyst and template for what would become the Barbie doll. Upon returning to Los Angeles, Ruth presented the Lily dolls to Mattel's design team with renewed enthusiasm for her adult doll concept. This time, with a concrete example in hand, her idea gained traction. Jack Ryan, Mattel's head of research and development, was assigned to re-engineer the doll for American production. The development process took 3 years, with considerable resistance along the way. Many Mattel executives remained skeptical, arguing that American parents would never buy their daughters a doll with breasts. Some toy buyers were openly hostile to the concept. "You can't make an adult-bodied doll for children," one major buyer told Ruth. "Mothers will never allow it." Ruth persisted, countering every objection with the simple observation that had started it all. Girls wanted to imagine their futures, not just rehearse motherhood. The Lily doll provided proof that the concept could work, but Ruth envisioned something more ambitious, a doll that would embody possibility for young girls, with fashions and accessories reflecting various career aspirations. As development progressed, the doll was named Barbie, after Ruth's daughter, with a backstory created to make her relatable. Barbara Millicent Roberts from the fictional town of Willows, Wisconsin. Her boyfriend, introduced later, would be named Ken, after the handler's son. The final design was less overtly sexual than the German Lily doll, but still featured distinctly adult proportions. Mattel's engineers refined the manufacturing process to allow for mass production, while designers created an extensive wardrobe of fashionable clothing and accessories. As the 1959 New York Toy Fair approached, the industry's most important annual event where new products were unveiled to buyers, Ruth pushed for Barbie to be Mattel's centerpiece presentation, despite continued skepticism from many within the company. "We're taking a big risk here," Elliot cautioned as they prepared for the toy fair. Ruth's response was characteristic of her confidence. "The biggest risk is not taking one." The reception at the 1959 Toy Fair was exactly what many at Mattel had feared. Buyers were skeptical, even dismissive. The doll's adult proportions drew criticism and raised eyebrows. Many refused to place orders, convinced that American mothers would reject the concept entirely. "It was a disaster," Ruth later recalled. "The buyers, all men, just couldn't understand why anyone would want a doll with breasts." But Ruth Handler had built her career on persistence in the face of rejection. Rather than retreating, she doubled down on her conviction, persuading Mattel to proceed with manufacturing despite the lukewarm industry response. In a bold and innovative move that would change toy marketing forever, Ruth decided to bypass the traditional buyers and speak directly to consumers. Mattel purchased sponsorship of segments of the Mickey Mouse Club, a popular children's television program, creating advertisements that spoke directly to children rather than their parents. When Barbie hit store shelves in March 1959, the TV campaign created instant demand. Despite buyers' predictions, the dolls flew off shelves. By the end of the year, Mattel had sold over 350,000 Barbies, far exceeding even Ruth's optimistic projections. The doll's success only accelerated from there. By 1961, the demand for Barbie and her expanding wardrobe of clothes and accessories had become so great that Mattel had to expand its facilities and workforce dramatically. The company went public, raising capital for further expansion. Ruth's insight about how girls played had been vindicated spectacularly. The Barbie doll had tapped into something profound about childhood development and imagination. Girls weren't just playing with a doll. They were rehearsing possible futures, experimenting with identities, and imagining adult lives beyond the limited roles often presented to them in 1950s America. By the mid-1960s, Barbie had transformed Mattel from a moderately successful toy manufacturer into one of the largest toy companies in the world. Ruth Handler, once dismissed by industry insiders for her inappropriate doll concept, had become one of the most powerful women in American business. Her management style was hands-on and demanding. She had an eye for talent and didn't hesitate to promote promising employees, including women at a time when female executives were rare. She also maintained tight control over Barbie's image and marketing, understanding that the doll's success depended on constant reinvention and relevance. "Barbie has always represented the fact that a woman has choices," Ruth explained in a 1977 interview. Even in her early years, Barbie did not have to settle for only being Ken's girlfriend or an inveterate shopper. She had the clothes, for example, to launch a career as a nurse, a stewardess, a teacher. As American culture evolved through the 1960s and 1970s, so did Barbie. The doll took on new careers reflecting the expanding possibilities for women in society. When feminists criticized Barbie's impossible proportions and emphasis on fashion, Ruth defended her creation while also evolving it, introducing diverse Barbies with different ethnicities and expanding her career options to include traditionally male-dominated fields. At the peak of her success, Ruth Handler seemed unstoppable. Mattel had become a corporate giant with annual sales exceeding $300 million by the early 1970s. The girl from an immigrant family in Denver, who had once been told she was too aggressive, was now hailed as a visionary entrepreneur. Then, in a dramatic reversal of fortune that seemed almost scripted in its timing, Ruth's carefully built empire began to crumble. The trouble began in 1970 when Ruth was diagnosed with breast cancer. The surgery she underwent, a radical mastectomy, was physically and emotionally devastating. Adding to this personal crisis, Mattel began facing serious financial difficulties due to overly ambitious expansion and manufacturing problems. In 1974, while Ruth was still recovering from her cancer treatment, investigators from the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, began examining Mattel's financial reporting practices. Their findings were damning. The company had issued false and misleading financial statements, artificially inflating reported profits to maintain its stock price. Although both Ruth and Elliot maintained they had no knowledge of the fraudulent accounting, Ruth, as the company's president, faced the brunt of the legal consequences. In 1978, she was indicted on charges of fraud and false reporting. Rather than endure a lengthy trial, she pleaded no contest to the charges, was forced to resign from Mattel, and received a fine and community service sentence. At 62, Ruth Handler found herself ousted from the company she had co-founded, her reputation tarnished, her health compromised, and her future uncertain. For many, this would have been the end of the story, a cautionary tale about the risks of corporate malfeasance. But Ruth Handler was not finished failing upward. During her recovery from breast cancer, Ruth had experienced firsthand the inadequacy of post-mastectomy prosthetics. The options available were uncomfortable, unrealistic, and often painful. As she had done decades earlier observing her daughter's play patterns, Ruth identified an unmet need and saw a business opportunity. "When I went shopping for a prosthesis, I was shocked," she later recalled. "They were heavy, uncomfortable, and looked nothing like a real breast. I thought, there has to be a better way." Working with prosthetist Peyton Massey, Ruth developed a more realistic breast prosthesis made of a softer, lighter material that matched the weight and movement of natural breast tissue. She named her new company Nearly Me and launched it in 1976, even as the SEC investigation into Mattel was still ongoing. The Nearly Me prosthesis represented a significant improvement over existing options, offering women a more comfortable and natural-looking alternative. Ruth approached the business with the same determination and innovation that had characterized her work at Mattel. She insisted on hiring breast cancer survivors as sales representatives, creating employment opportunities for women who often faced discrimination due to their medical history. "I had to prove I wasn't dead," Ruth said of this period. "I had to show those bastards that what they did to me wouldn't defeat me." The Nearly Me venture was successful, though never on the scale of Barbie. However, it represented something perhaps more significant than commercial success. It was a personal redemption and a transformation of personal tragedy into social good. In a poignant twist, the woman who had created a doll with an anatomically unlikely figure was now helping real women feel whole again after losing a part of their bodies. The entrepreneur once criticized for promoting unrealistic beauty standards was now deeply engaged with questions of female body image and self-esteem. Ruth ran Nearly Me until 1991, when she sold the company to a former employee. By then, she had been welcomed back into Mattel's orbit as a respected elder stateswoman, consulted on special projects, and honored at Barbie anniversary celebrations. In the years before her death in 2002, Ruth Handler reflected often on the serendipitous connections between the different chapters of her life. The observation of her daughter's play that led to Barbie, the breast cancer that led to Nearly Me, the public failure that led to a more private form of success. "I've lived my life from one crisis to another," she once said, "but I've always believed that a crisis is really an opportunity." This philosophy, seeing potential where others saw problems, defined Ruth's career. From her early recognition of the commercial possibilities in Elliot's plastic designs, to her insight about girls' play patterns, to her identification of the need for better breast prosthetics. The Barbie doll remains Ruth Handler's most visible legacy. With more than 1 billion dolls sold in over 150 countries, Barbie has become a cultural icon, analyzed by academics, celebrated by collectors, and beloved by generations of children. The doll has evolved significantly since her 1959 debut, reflecting changing social attitudes about beauty, diversity, and women's roles. Critics continue to debate Barbie's influence on girls' body image and gender expectations. Some see the doll as promoting unrealistic beauty standards, while others point to Barbie's career diversity as empowering. Ruth herself acknowledged the complexity of this legacy. Barbie has always been controversial and has always done well, she noted near the end of her life. Controversy enhances the product, actually. Perhaps the most profound aspect of Ruth Handler's story is how her greatest commercial success and her most personal venture were united by a common theme: the empowerment of women and girls to imagine and create their own futures. Whether through a doll that allowed girls to rehearse adult roles or a prosthesis that helped women reclaim their confidence after cancer, Ruth's innovations address deeply human needs for dignity, possibility, and self-determination. Her journey from immigrant's daughter to toy industry pioneer to cancer survivor and medical innovator represents a remarkable story of resilience and reinvention. Each setback, wartime material shortages, industry skepticism about Barbie, cancer, legal troubles, became a launching pad for the next phase of creative problem solving. In this sense, Ruth Handler embodied the very quality she sought to instill in children through Barbie: the ability to envision and create new possibilities, to transform limitations into opportunities, and to persistently rewrite one's own story. As she put it in her 1994 autobiography, "My whole philosophy of Barbie was that, through the doll, the girl could be anything she wanted to be." Barbie always represented the fact that a woman has choices. For Ruth Handler, those choices included the decision to persevere when others doubted her vision, to reinvent herself when her corporate career imploded, and to transform her most painful personal experience into an opportunity to help others. In doing so, she demonstrated that the capacity to fail upward, to extract value and meaning from apparent disaster, may be the most valuable skill of all.